Hi, I'm Marika from My Creative Quilts. This video is going to be about making masks, basic masks. It's not about quilting, but a lot of people have asked me about my technique and the masks that I make. Over the past few months, I've made several hundred masks, probably closing in on 1,000 soon. And that's because I donate them to the community and to friends and family, and I ask them to donate in exchange money to my local food depot, my local food bank. As a result, we've raised well over $2,000. And for every $1 the depot gets, they can buy $3 worth of food. So I am absolutely delighted at the response. There's a long story behind it, and you can read about it in my blog. But as a result, I've developed my very quick technique, and I make just the plain rectangle masks with 3 pleats for adults, 2 pleats for children. I don't make the curved ones, the different pad style ones, because I found these ones quicker. As a nurse, when I was working clinically, I had to wear masks a lot. I'm used to wearing the rectangle masks, so that's the one I tend to gravitate towards. If you're new at this, if you're just beginning to make masks, these ones are good ones to start because there's no curves. And then as you become more comfortable with sewing masks, then maybe you can decide you want to use a different style or a different model. So for example, this is one of the ones that I don't make anymore. I tried it a few times. It's a good one. It's a good style for people who like it, but I personally don't like this one. It works just as well as any other one, so if this is a style that you like, go ahead and make it. But the ones that I make are rectangular and they have the pleats. People ask why the pleats are necessary. They pull the fabric away from your face. You can have cloth just against it, but that can get uncomfortable. So the pleats can help you. The children's masks have only 2 pleats because it's smaller and it's harder to get, but you can put 3 pleats in there if you want. I try to make my masks reversible so that they're fun. You can adapt your mask according to your style that day or what you're wearing or whatever. So this one is a nice succulent fabric in the front and a pretty green. So whichever one I feel like using for the day is the one that I'm going to use. This is actually one of my masks. It's been used several times. So there are a few decisions you have to make before you start making your masks. Do you want to use elastics or do you want to use ties? Ties are very good for longer periods of time. I tend to use the elastics because I don't wear my masks for very long because I don't go out very often. But when I had to go to the hospital for a procedure a couple of weeks ago, I wore one with ties because I knew I would be wearing it for a few hours and it would be more comfortable for me. So you decide, do you want elastics or do you want ties? Most people who request masks from me ask for elastics. So it really is a personal choice. If you decide you want to use elastics, you have more choices. You can get just the plain elastics. This is a 1/4 inch. When I started making the masks, I had in my stash 1-inch elastics, and I cut them. They work just as well. So these are the regular ones. You can buy them on a roll. You can buy them in packages. They were hard to find for a while, but they've become easier to get. You can also get these are more like fabric. And these are actually, some stores call them mask elastics. They're more comfortable than these ones, but these ones can be harder to find. So it's your choice, whichever one you want to use. If you want to use ties, you have a lot of options. You can buy bias tape already made. You can buy it on the roll. All different colors are available, or you can buy them in packages, but you need a lot. So if you're going to use packages, you need to buy a lot of them. It's almost better to buy it at the roll. So you can buy them and attach them like this, okay? Or you can use just whatever you want. You can make your own bias tape with muslin or with matching fabric. As you can see here, I used matching fabric to make this bias tape. Some people use twill tape. I have made masks with twill tape, and I have some on order, so you can do that as well. And you can use shoelaces. You can use pretty well anything. Some people have used strips of t-shirt because they're a little bit stretchy. You can use your imagination as long as it's washable and as long as it'll put up with being pressed, because you need to press it when you make it, whatever works. So it really does depend on your preference and what you have available. So once you've decided if you want elastics or if you want tape, string, you're ready to go. So you need to cut your fabric. For adults, generally, it's 6 inches by 9. And that's actually pretty easy for me because I have my 6-inch ruler and then I just cut it to 9 inches. For people who are larger or for men who have beards, I might make them a little bit bigger. And for children, they're either 5 and 8 inches or 5 and 7 inches, depending on the size of the child. So you just cut a whole bunch of pieces of fabric the right size, and then you are ready to go. Okay, let's talk about the ties, the bias tape, and the elastics. So if you're making a mask with elastics, you're going to need 2 pieces that are 7 inches long, 1 for each ear. If you are making a mask with ties that you're going to be using twill tape or even shoelaces, whatever you decide to use, you're going to need about a 14 or 15 inch length. A little bit longer is probably better. It's easier to go longer and cut shorter if you need to. You're going to need 4 of those if you're going to be using ties. If you're going to be using bias tape, you need only 2 pieces, but you need about 44 inches because it's going to go all the way across, and you're going to need 2 pieces of that. So you have to decide what you're going to do. The first mask that I'm going to show you will be using the elastics, but it's also the same method as using the ties. So normally I recommend using a 1/4 inch foot because we want a 1/4 inch seam. When it comes to making the masks though, I tend to use the regular foot, and I watch for the 1/4 inch foot because as you're sewing, the elastics and the ties can bump and make this a little bit more difficult. So I'm just going to switch to a regular foot, but maintain my 1/4 inch foot. So I take the 2 pieces of fabric that I decide I want to use for my mask and put them wrong sides together. Now you're going to need to leave you're going to be sewing all the way around, but you're going to be needing a spot to turn it right side out. So I usually start sewing about here. Don't forget to backstitch because you want to make sure that the stitching is fastened. So you're not using your ties or anything yet. You're just starting the stitches. So I have my 1/4 inch line here, which I know is, so I'm just going to drop my foot. I'm going to do a couple of back stitches. And then I'm going to move forward. And I'm going to stop at a 1/4 inch. Now I eyeball it. You don't have to eyeball it. If you're not certain of where a 1/4 inch is going to be, all you need to do is take a marker and just mark it on the fabric. Just mark your 1/4 inch corners. And then you're going to feel more comfortable about where to stop and start. So just like I said, I'm eyeballing it because I've been doing so many of these. So now that you've reached your 1/4 inch, you're going to lift your thing and you're going to turn it. Okay, now this is where you either put in the ties or the elastic. So again, you can eyeball it. I usually put the elastic about a 1/4 inch or 1/2 inch down from the seam. All right, so that would be about where this is. Okay, but it doesn't really matter what you pick as long as you're consistent. So again, you can mark it if you're more comfortable. I don't need to mark it, so I'm just going to lift the edge here, slip my elastic in. It's my 7 inch one, yeah. Lift my foot, and I'm just going to slide it in so that the elastic is right there along the edge. And I'm going to pull this down over. Now I can feel with my finger that the elastic is there, and it's about a little less than a finger width. So I'm just going to sew a few stitches to fasten it down. Then I'm going to lift this up again, and I'm going to make sure my elastic is straight, and I'm going to curve it down to about here. I usually do about a finger width. And I'm going to hold it down, and I'm going to hold down the fabric, and I'm going to stitch all the way down. Over the elastic, and then again stop at 1/4 inch. Then we just go all the way down the side. Stopping at a 1/4 inch. And then doing the same thing. Now here, because I want to be consistent, if I haven't marked it, I just sort of, I can feel where the elastic is. And I can feel it's a finger width. So I'm going to do a finger width like this. So I'm going to lift my foot, take my second piece of elastic, place it a finger width down from the seam, place it flat, bring my fabric over, and then I'm going to feel that's a finger width. That's not quite a finger width, so I'm going to bring it down a little bit more. It doesn't have to be exact. This is really, as long as it's close enough. So again, I'm going to do some stitching, and then I'm going to lift the fabric, pull out the other end, and put it down here. I'm going to measure with my finger. It's a little less than a finger width down there. So I'm going to do it like that. A little less than a finger width down there. So down to 1/4 of an inch. Turn. Now remember, I have to leave an opening here. So I'm going to be sewing to about here. I'm just going to backstitch a bit and then cut off my thread. See? And then I also check, because sometimes, even though I've cut all the pieces to be the right size, sometimes you make mistakes and you don't cut it quite as big. So I just double check the edge, and look, you know what? I went 1/4 of an inch, but I went a little bit thin there. So I'm just going to go over that and do another seam a little bit in a little farther. I'm not happy with that. So I'm just going to, there we go. And that's because I want to make sure that the fabric catches everywhere. So that's the first part. So if I was doing with ties, I would do the same thing, but because you have 4 ties, I would sew my fabric together like this along the side, add 1 tie, sew down, add another tie, sew down the edge, add 1 tie, sew down, add 1 tie, sew down part way, and then you have the same effect. So now that we've done this, we need to cut our corners. Okay, so now we want to turn this inside out, but when you are right side out. But when you have corners, you need to clip them, because otherwise they become too bulky. It's important to be careful not to cut the threads in the corner, because you've made your seam and you don't want to cut the thread, so you cut close enough to it. So all you do is you take a sharp pair of scissors and you cut your corner. And you cut all 4 corners. Like that. And you've got your corners. Now that you've cut your corners, you can turn it inside out. Be gentle, because you don't want to stress the stitching on the edges, but see, you can pull out your elastic and you poke up the corners. So you can use it the end of a pen. I have this bamboo presser that I like to use. Whatever you use, be careful, because it's easy to get too enthusiastic and to press your corner hard enough that you break through the fabric, or you break through the seam. So you just push out your corners, and you're right side out. So now you're ready to press it. And now we're ready to press it. So you turn your seams in like this. Some people will press those seams before they've turned it. So let's say this is still inside out, this one that I've done. Some people, I've done it on occasion, it's actually not a bad idea. They will press back the 1/4 inch seam before they turn it. So let's try that and see what it does. There's water in my iron. I don't usually leave water in there, because they start, no matter how good your iron is, it can start leaking. But for masks, I find the water and the steam really help. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to compare. How's that? I will give that a quick press. The iron's not hot enough yet. I haven't used it for a little bit. So there we go. And then we'll do the other side as well. And we'll see if it makes a difference. All right, that's pressed. So I haven't trimmed my corners. These are the scissors I like for that. So I'm just going to clip my corners, being careful not to cut the seam. If you cut the seam, it's not the end of the world. You just bring it back to the sewing machine and sew it back again. That's all. And then we're going to turn. My writer friends like these fabrics because there's like a newspaper on this side, there's a book fabric on this side. So I'm just pressing out my corners, being gentle. I have poked through enough corners in my lifetime. Okay, so there. See, it does make it a little bit easier when you're going to press it. So it's up to you, however you do it. I don't usually do it, but it's probably not a bad idea. Okay, so this is the one we sewed together. I'm just going to press it down because we need to press it before we go to the next step. So there we go. Just press that down. Pull out the seams a little bit so they don't because you can lose a lot of fabric if you let the seams roll in. So just kind of roll them out and try to make the, see? So you just try and roll it out to make it as straight as possible. And then I might as well press this one since I turned it the inside out. Roll my seams, they're okay, they're okay. There we go. So you just press it flat, that's all. Try not to linger with the iron over the elastic. I don't know what the heat will do to it. So did pressing it before I turn it make a big difference? No, I don't think so. But you know, if that works for you, go ahead. Okay, so now that we've done that, we have to go back to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. Lucky for me, I've already done that on another mask. See, I just sewed all the way around. Okay, it's called, you're just top stitching it because you want to hold the fabric into place. So now comes the pleating part. You need the pleats because otherwise the fabric is going to be lean against your face. So again, the instructions say to mark it. You can take your ruler and you can mark three marks inches apart. I don't mark it anymore. I've done enough of them. I just fold them down like this. I make one pleat like this, press it down. When there's water in there, it really makes, this is a wool ironing surface, and I find that really helps make nice flat seams too, nice crisp seams. Fold it over for a second seam. See, I've got my first seam, fold it over for the second seam, press that one down again. Now it's pretty hot. Sometimes I wait before I do the third seam because I don't like to burn myself. But just sew down my third seam, hold it down, and press it down. There, we've got our 3 seams. 3 pleats. I don't know why I always call them seams, pleats. So here is where I differ a little bit from the pattern that you'll find online. When I read the pattern and I first started making them, the instructions were to go along the top edging again. And I thought, you know, that was an extra step that I wasn't willing to do, just because I didn't feel it made so much of a difference. So what I do now is I do my topping, my top stitching, I make my pleats, and then I just sew down the sides with a double seam. And I find that works just as well. It saves a little bit of time, a little bit of thread, and I haven't had any complaints yet from people who have masks like this. So that's what I have to do next. I've done my pleats and I need to sew them down and then we're done. Let's take a look. All right, we're back at the machine. Here is my thread, my mask that I've pleated. So I'm going to go a 1/4 inch, and it's going to be a little bit more than a 1/4 inch. I actually use my foot as my guide as to where I'm going to go. I'm going to put the edge along the edge of the foot. I'm going to backstitch. Now make sure your elastic or your tie is not underneath. Like, it's been a few times when I've had them underneath and I realize when I reach a bump, oops, and then I have to take it out. So then you just stitch along the edge down the bottom and then lift, pivot, and stitch back. I like the double stitching because I find it gives it a bit more strength. Then you just backstitch again and cut your thread. And then you do the same on the other side. You start, hold it down. You can pin it. I don't bother anymore, but you can, and definitely pin it if that makes you more comfortable. But I don't bother, only because I've made so many. Okay, now sometimes the machine doesn't like the extra seams there, so I have to lift my needle, lift my foot a touch, and then just move the mask over it, just a little bit. And then you can see it moves. Never force your fabric through because that bends the needle and causes a lot of other problems. So if it doesn't work, if it doesn't move, like it just did again there, lift the needle, lift your foot, move the fabric a touch, put the needle back down. See, this machine's not happy right now, so I'm just going to do it again. And there we go. And then you cut. And there you have a mask with elastics. So I'm just going to trim my threads off here. And trim that one. And then, like I said, it's reversible, which I like. Sometimes I might feel like wearing a more sedate or subtle mask. Other times I may decide I want a nice brighter one. Okay, so that's it for the masks and the ties. What about if you want to use the bias tape? Very, very easy. You take, again, your 2 pieces of fabric, but this time you're just going to sew along this edge and this edge. So at 1/4 of an inch. So just 1/4 of an inch. Cut it. And then the other side. So unlike the masks you have to make with the masks you make with the ties and the elastics, there are no corners to cut. So now that you've sewn both edges like this, you're going to turn it inside out and you're going to press it down like this. Because what you're going to do after that is take your bias tape and sew it along the top, and it covers these raw edges. Okay, so the trick here is to try to make the edges as crisp as possible, because you don't want the back side of the fabric showing on the front side of the mask. So you just do a little, there we go. All right, so I have the bias tape cut out. It's about 44 inches. So this is where sometimes I mark it, sometimes I don't. I often eyeball it still. So you can either, you can do a little press to make the middles. So I'll do that just because I'm showing you, so I should do a good job, right? So we'll just press that. And then if you want, you can also press the middle a little bit of the mask so you know exactly where that is. Again, usually I just eyeball it, but I'll just press it like this. So there, we see where the middle is of this. And then we're going to go and attach the bias tape. So when you're stitching down the bias tape, you have to be careful that you catch both edges, because this is going to go around the mask. So you want to make sure it gets caught on both edges. So don't sew too close, okay? So this is where I do either use pins or clips. Clips I find are better, but use whichever you have. I find my center. I put my binding tape on, and then I just attach it in the middle and at both ends. And again, make sure that it's right in the fold, because if it's not far enough in the fold, you might not catch it when you're stitching, and it can fall apart while you're wearing it. And then I'll do the other side. I'll find the center that I pressed. Now this is where I might switch to my 1/4 foot, but I don't usually. I will put down my foot, and I'm going to move my needle over so it's closer to the edge. There we go. But not so close to the edge that I might not catch the back. So again, we back stitch. And then we just start sewing. Just make sure you keep it even, okay? I'm at about 1/4 of an inch on the marker, but it's more than 1/4 of an inch because my needle has been moved over. So just stitch down. People have asked me what kind of thread I use. I actually use whatever I have handy. Not the very thin threads that we use for quilting, but anything that you use for piecing will be strong enough for the mask, especially since we do a lot of double seams along the sides for the pleats. So we'll just keep going. Okay, now we're getting to the mask. Again, I stop for a second and I make sure my mask is right in there. I want the edge right up at the fold. There we go. And again, it can come out a little bit if you pull, if you tug, if you're not paying attention. So I just double check again. Now before I go too far, I like to look and make sure that I have gotten it all, because I might get distracted or, you know, something might happen. And then I just keep sewing until it's done. And here we go, and backspace. Now with twill tape, ties, anything, I always tie a knot at the end, because they can easily become unraveled depending on the fabric that you're using. So I always tie a knot on the end. There we go. And then we do the other side. And the second binding is sewn down. And again, I check the back to make sure I've caught it all. So this is one that's finished. We just make the pleats like we did in the other one, and it's finished. You can make your own bias tape and your own ties. You don't have to have anything fancy. You can do it by hand, just folding over, cutting your strips and folding over the seams and sewing them together, or pressing them together. But that can get time consuming, and you can burn your fingers up really easily. So they do sell these, I'm not sure what they're called. I think they're just called bias tape makers. And I've had these for several years. I didn't use them a lot until I started making masks, and then all of a sudden, well, I have a good use for them. So this smaller one makes these small ties that I like. And I'll show you in a second how to do it. So I cut a 1-inch piece of fabric, and it makes these thinner ties. This bigger one, you use a 2-inch piece of fabric, and you can make, it turns out into this size of bias tape. So let me just show you how I make it, and then that'll be it for this video. Okay, so to make your own bias tape, I'm using the bigger one to show you first. This is a 2-inch strip. So, at least I hope it's a 2-inch strip. Let me just double check, because I cut it this morning, and yeah, it's a 2-inch strip. So these things can be a little bit fiddly to get used to learning how to use, but once you know how to use it, it's quite easy. The easiest way to get this started is to cut the edge into a point. So I just fold this in half, and I'm cutting the corners to make a point. So then this is the opening. You slide this into the device, whatever you call it, and gently move it forward. And then there's an opening here, so you use a pin, and you just keep pushing it forward a little bit. And eventually, you should start seeing fabric coming out the other end. There we go. And it's folded into a bias tape. So you can press it. Just take your iron, and you start pressing it. You pull this along. Now it's important to make sure that the fabric is feeding in properly. You want to make sure there's equal amount of fabric on both sides. Otherwise you're going to get an uneven fold here. So you just keep pulling it and pulling it. Until you get to the end. It can get hot because it's metal, so you can use the handle. I think that's what you're supposed to do anyway. Just keep going. Let's keep going. Until you get to the end. Then you need to press it one more time. You need to fold it over. So you just fold it in half. And you keep going. Now I think you can still get a size bigger than this, because this is a 2-inch wide strip, and I think you can get for as much as 2.5 inches, which I would prefer for bias tape for some situations, but this works perfectly fine. And there we have our bias tape. There you go. Very simple. Done. And then you can do it with the smaller one. If I can find it. There it is. Same thing. Cut your point. Just, you don't have to do it. I just find it's a lot easier to feed it in. Slide it in there. And then Just nudge it forward with it. There we go. And it's the same thing. You just press it until you're done. Now it's too late for this video, but for longer videos that you want to see what's happening, but you don't want to sit through 15, 20, 30 minutes of it, you can put the speed on 1.5. It goes faster, but you still see everything that needs to be seen. There we go. Now, instead of pressing it down because it's so narrow, I mean, you can, but what I do is I'll bring it to the sewing machine and I'll sew it down using my 1/4 inch foot. So that's my technique for basic mask making. I think this is a really good place for you to start if you've never sewn masks or anything even remotely similar. And then once you get comfortable with this, you can find the more advanced ones if you decide you want to have the curved ones or ones that have pockets or various different designs. Whatever you pick, just be careful that you follow the instructions properly and that they're good instructions. So, you know, pick an organization such as Vanderbilt University, where I got this from, or masks that are recommended by other healthcare facilities and healthcare services, because they pretty well know what they're doing. Take your time. We're going to be needing masks for a long time to come. So, you know, if you've decided you want to make masks, I think there's still plenty of time to do it. One thing I forgot to mention at the beginning was the kind of material or the fabric that I use. I only use 100% cotton, quilter quality cotton, because it's a tighter weave. I have used sheets and pillowcases and things like that to make ties, but for the actual fabric that goes over your face, it has to be a high quality. I know it can be expensive compared to the cheaper cotton that you can buy, but if you're going to be making masks to protect yourselves and to protect others, you might as well do it properly, right? So anyway, that's my tutorial for how to make masks, Mask Making 101. I hope you learned something, and go forth and make masks. I'll see you again.